It's my pleasure to welcome our first keynote speaker, Steve Lipner, who's someone I've known for a good number of years, so it's great to see you again. Steve is the executive director of SafeCode, a nonprofit industry organization dedicated to increasing trust in ICT products and services through the advancement of effective software assurance methods. He's also an adjunct professor of computer science at the Institute for Software Research at Carnegie Mellon. He retired in 2015 as a partner director at Microsoft, where he was the creator and longtime leader of Microsoft's secure development lifecycle. Steve holds 12 U.S. patents in computer and network security, and he was elected in 2010 to the Information Systems Security Association Hall of Fame, and in 2015 to the National Cybersecurity Hall of Fame, and in 2017 to the National Academy of Engineering. So quite a retirement there. Thank you so much for presenting today, Foundational Cybersecurity Research, a report of a study from NASEM. Thank you. And yeah, let's see if we can get your slides up here. Hopefully. Where's Katie? Yeah, here we go. Yeah, there we go.
I think I uploaded them last night, and I hope they don't crash the podium machine. So actually, George gave a lot of introduction, or maybe a lot of overlap of the material I'm going to present. Let me just give you a little background on sort of why I'm here. The National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine are both an honorary organization, but also a public service organization that brings people from professionals from the whatever field is of interest together to do studies and analyses and produce reports in an effort to provide advice and guidance primarily to the U.S. government, some nonprofits under specific circumstances. The report I'm talking about was conducted from roughly 2012 until 2017, and I'll tell you a little about that history in a couple of minutes. At the request of George's organization of R2 at NSA to look at the science of cybersecurity, and I was a member of the committee that conducted that study. Carl Landwehr, who's in the room trying to be inconspicuous, was also a member. Let's see. I'll go to the next slide. Whoop, I think I'll go to the next slide. Maybe I won't go to the next slide. That's not a touch screen. Okay. So I got it. If I can't figure that out, well, I'm in big trouble. So this is what I'm going to try to talk about today. Sort of some of the background of the study, and I already started on some of that, and then sort of an overview of security science, or maybe of security broadly, and then the core pieces are the framework that the committee came up with. Some discussion of institutional challenges. I'll show you the conclusions of the study, and then I'm hoping I'll do all those things in a short enough time so that I can take some questions or respond to some comments. And maybe we ought to lock the doors and not let you out for the break until you actually ask some questions, assuming I'm reasonably short on my agenda. So this is the committee. Baruch Fishoff from Carnegie Mellon and Peter Weinberger from Google were the co-chairs. The study was science of cybersecurity, but one of the things that you'll notice is that the participation in the study committee was pretty broad. We had some university faculty, but also some folks who are practitioners, engineers, engineering leaders of one flavor or another. Steve Wallach, if you remember the book, The Soul of a New Machine, he was the guy who led the development of the Data General, I think it was the Eclipse series back in the 80s. He's a hardware engineering guy. I was still in my secure development role at Microsoft when I started out on that committee. John Alexander runs a system engineering group, or ran a system engineering group at Aerospace. And then a lot of, not to give short shrift, go through all the list, but a lot of academics, Carnegie Mellon, Cornell, UC San Diego, Georgia Tech, and a range of fields. Oh, and Phil Venables, who's the Chief Security Officer of Goldman Sachs. So this is not just your science research agenda crowd. The intent was to be broad and look at the issue not only from the perspective of what's the state of security science, but also what's the need, what's the problem, what's important. This is the charge. Multi-phased, look beyond traditional cybersecurity topics, look at economics and behavioral science, look at foundational work, but also the needs for foundational work and what sorts of things ought to be done to transition research into application. Look at both the classified and unclassified settings that are customers for research or consumers of research results. So a very broad agenda. The theory initially was that we were going to do an unclassified study followed by a classified appendix, and what actually happened. The study, I guess the initial discussions for the study kicked off around 2011. The actual study started in the fall of 2012. We had a number of meetings, got a lot of momentum going, a lot of good discussions, started to write some things. And then in 2013, the money funding the study turned into a pumpkin. And so we were told to cease and desist and put our pencils down and stop work, and they'd get back to us. And the get back to us step, I think, happened in late 14. We had a couple of more meetings in 14 and 15, did our actual writing through 15 and 16, and the report came out early last year. The unclassified report came out early last year. And at that point, or after that point, we did a brief classified follow-on and prepared a short addendum, and then wrapped up late last year. So the report came out over a long period, and so some folks have said, why didn't you consider these things? And the answer in some cases is because we had gotten past the point of considering stuff when the work was actually done. The schedule for the effort was funny. So if you look at it, sort of bear that in mind. The reviewers, I guess Academy protocol, just to list who the reviewers were. Obviously, the reviewers aren't responsible for what's said. The academy, the committee, and the academies are responsible, and it is a consensus report, which means while some of us may have had some differences of opinion about some things in the report, we basically all signed off on what's out there. So let's talk about what we thought the situation of cybersecurity science was or is. There have been lots of research agendas in cybersecurity science, probably over the last, in my memory, 40 years. But sort of where are we? Well, it's a dynamic environment. I mean, we have Mark Zuckerberg on Capitol Hill today, talking. Is that a cybersecurity issue, or is that a cybersecurity failure? I think you could sort of make the case that it was. We have cybersecurity research papers. I was involved in efforts in the 70s. People did a lot in the 80s. There's been a lot of investment over the past 40 or 45 years, and yet things still are not what I would call great. Part of the challenge, lots of stakeholders, lots of actors, lots of diverse needs, lots of different levels of awareness. My memory from when I was still with Microsoft early on, was of I started out. I tell people I started out at Microsoft in 1999, running the Security Response Center, which was the organization that was responsible for dealing with externally reported vulnerabilities in Microsoft products. When I started that job in 1999, I was 25 years old, okay? You're supposed to do the math and then laugh. The reality was, but when I started, we would get reports and I would take them to some program manager and he would say, why would anybody do that? Tell them not to do that, okay? This was with regard to exploiting a terrible vulnerability in some Microsoft product. So awareness, priorities, I have to ship versus, I have to ship a secure product, and things have changed, but are we where we need to be? Probably not yet. There has been an increasing emphasis on science of security, but I'm not sure there's yet a clear definition of what that means. I think the points on the slide here are the right ones. Results that can be generalized, evidentiary standards, understanding what you've demonstrated or proven, and what you haven't. But there's a lot of work going on at a lot of different levels of quality and definition, and so still a lot to do. So the committee wanted to start, from the statement of task and from what we knew about other disciplines and what we knew about the problem, and see if we could provide a fresh perspective. I'll leave it to you to tell whether we got there. Statement of task, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's what the academies have to work from. So, the bottom line today, not good. Lots of investments, lots of resources, still problems. I don't think, and I would hope nobody in the room would dispute that. And the implication is that old approaches haven't been adequate. Okay, not shouldn't just take what we've been doing and do it harder and expect a different result. And why? George talked about the asymmetry, and that's a reason. Progress isn't the same as actually making things better. One of the things I used to worry about when I was at Microsoft, we put a ton of work into improving the security of our software. Other companies, a lot of other companies have done that too. Most of them are still issuing security updates monthly. So, what does that mean about better on the defensive side? Tough problem. Part of the problem, of course, is the bad guys don't stop. They're energetic and intelligent, and they're operating in a target-rich environment. There are lots of great ideas for research, lots of things that have been come up with that people have come up with over the years. Getting adoption is tricky. We're dealing in a world that is not just technical systems, but human beings. It seems like most of what we see, a lot of what we see today, starts out with some mechanism where you're fooling the user, not just launching a technical direct attack on some mechanism. We depend on everybody. This is one of the arguments that I keep having in my safe code role today. In 1974, we thought we could build a 2,000-line security kernel. All the security of the system would be there. We could outsource to the KGB or to Cozy Bear or Fancy Bear to write the rest of the system, and our sensitive information still wouldn't be classified. Anybody remember those arguments? Turned out not. Carl remembers those arguments. Turned out not so much. People don't use systems like that, so we wind up having to build the security into all of the system. That means that all the developers, all the designers have to be designing secure systems, and that ain't happening. The slide says coding and design mistakes, insecure practices. I think the highlight is probably something I added to the slides: mediocre training. How do people know how to write code that doesn't have buffer overruns or isn't subject to SQL injection or isn't subject to cross-site scripting or any of the design errors that people make today? And organizational incapacities. I have a friend who put a note on, I guess it's his Facebook page or somewhere, talking about his reaction when he went in for an MRI and saw that the computer controlling the MRI machine was running Windows XP. Sort of scary. And complexity. Laptop, a web server, the brakes on the Metro system. You need up-to-date knowledge. Let's see, why did that not advance? There you go. So and then even if we do something, if we come up with something better, how do you get people to adopt? And George talked about passwords. I think there's another slide later about passwords, but that's an example where there's research results that didn't get adopted for a long time. I'll talk some more about that in a minute. One of my favorite examples is the OPM, where they, I think a lot of, when I see uniforms and I know people are from the government, lots of people in this room probably had their security clearance records sent to China a few years ago because of a breach in the Office of Personnel Management. And why did that happen? Well, I submit that happened because OPM made a risk management decision, okay? They said, the management there said, we're not going to invest in security, we're going to do new programs, or we're going to cut our budget, or we're going to offer new services, or we're going to prioritize something else, because the risk of operating the way we're operating is acceptable, and they guessed wrong. So that's not a technical cybersecurity. That's not a technical cybersecurity research result, but it's something that if we want to affect the real world, we have to contend with. And the Langner and Peterson paper is a nice exposition of the way people make risk management decisions. On another front, I remember when I was on a business trip in China a number of years ago, and this is Microsoft anecdote. We had just issued a patch for the horrible vulnerability that eventually resulted in the Conficker worm. And I was on vacation. I got a call on my cell phone from the chief security officer of a big company, Fortune 10, and he said, "Hey, Steve, this thing looks really bad. You released the patch. Should we?" This is a guy with hundreds of thousands of computers running affected software. He says, "Should I patch all of them this weekend on the normal schedule, or should I go tonight?" And I said, "It's really bad. It's really bad, Mark. Go tonight." And he said, "Okay." And he go back to your vacation. And he hung up the phone. And that was the last I ever heard of that issue at that company. Okay, I'll patch my hundreds of thousands of systems tonight. So that's the other side of risk management to the OPM story. What makes the difference? What makes one organization make a decision like that, and another make a decision that says, "I'm going to accept the risk and send all my all the data I'm custodian of to China." And in case you haven't gathered, these are not the questions historically asked about research agenda in cybersecurity. So broad discussions, interesting. You get a feeling for the dynamic of the committee. And from our deliberations, we came out with a four-part framework with the elements listed here. And so what I'm going to do is go through each of them, sort of broad improvement of what I think of as sort of a classic cybersecurity science, integrating social and behavioral sciences into cybersecurity. And we thought, the statement of task asked us about that. We thought that was an important and a new issue. Integrating engineering and life cycle considerations. Talk about that as well. And then sustaining long-term support. Probably talk least about that because we thought things were pretty healthy there. talk about scientific underpinnings. That again, George referred to some of the recent papers on the science of security. At the time the report was released or prepared, we had the Fred Schneider paper from the Next Wave journal from 2012, and the Hurley and von Oerschot paper was just available in preprint, pre-publication form, so we were able to refer to Hurley and von Oerschot. The other papers that George referred to came out after this report had been locked down. But I think I'm a fan of the Hurley and von Oerschot paper just because it makes some points that I think have been ignored over or missed over the years, including sort of the difference between mathematical models of the world and the world, which is something certainly that I was party to back in the 70s when we said we're going to build a security kernel that implements the Bell and LaPagina model and all will be perfection. It also talks about the importance of experiment, talks about the importance of theorems being falsifiable, talks about the importance of conducting experiments, collecting data. Those things all rang true, at least with me, and I think probably with the other folks on the committee. So, what did we advocate for? Points there. Treating cybersecurity like other scientific or analyzable phenomena. We talked about the crypto and programming languages community as elements of the cybersecurity world that have done probably a better job in taking a scientific approach. We identified some open questions. Are there classes of attacks, defenses, and policies? There's this thing, MITRE has a ton of taxonomies they publish. One of them is CWE, the Common Weaknesses Enumeration. And I look at that and I wonder, is that really a taxonomy where things fall into neat categories and subcategories, or is it just a list where you come up with a new kind of a vulnerability and then, you have to go back and, add something at the top because it doesn't fall into the taxonomy. I mean, to the extent that things are better structured and better understood, that makes it easier for us to think about what we're doing to defend against them. So important stuff. Independence, orthogonality, those are things that would be helpful concepts as we're trying to build secure systems. Let's see. Passwords, we've talked about passwords. They're insufficient. They don't protect, protect against some classes of attacks. Not a lot of them, obviously. The recent results on frequent change. I guess, this is a big deal that Hurley has pushed. I think his results came out a long time ago. NIST finally changed the guidance on changing passwords in the last year, long after the research results came out. But the question is, why did we have those policies in the first place? What was the research that said that was a good idea? Well, it seems sensible to me that if passwords once disclosed or weakened, I ought to change them often. There are actually some specific system considerations that drove change in some domains, but it's a matter of accepting, doing the research, integrating the research results, and then building systems that apply the research results. How do you translate into practice? Another that we talked about covert channels in the report. More recent things. I mean, we've known about covert channels since Butler Lampson's paper in '72. So this is not a new thing. We did theoretical experimental work in support of the Orange Book in the '80s. We characterized the problem. We determined that it was awful. We made some progress on mitigations, and then we all sort of spun down. And then side channels, which aren't exactly the same thing as the covert channels we were dealing with in the Orange Book world, came up in the 1990s and 2000s in the context of the crypto community and ways of extracting keys. And there's been a lot of progress. I think anybody who builds a crypto device thinks about side channel attacks as part of building the crypto device. But, surprise, Spectre and Meltdown in 2017 and 18, and I started reading some of those papers, I said, I was thinking, gee, I've been transported back to 1989. So, where's the research? Do we continue the research? Do we apply the research? Do we generalize the research? Tough domain, tough field. And so long term, these are the goals for the research community that we called out. And I think this conference, these events sponsored, I guess largely by NSA, these events are an important consideration in getting to this goal. So so a lot of weight dumped on your shoulders. Second research agenda or research domain that we recommended was integrating the social, behavioral, and decision sciences. And these are I think I've sort of previewed a lot of the points here. Security is not just a technical area. A lot of technical component, but not just a technical area. And the social and behavioral and decision sciences provide a reservoir of approaches for attacking complex problems. And the traditional cybersecurity community is computer scientists or engineers, people like me, who don't have sufficient sensitivity to those areas. I'll give you an example. Back to the 70s, 80s, we created the Bell-LaPadula model. We created which underlies the Orange Book, and we said, okay, information will be classified. It won't be, declassifying it will be a special act. Will require the user to, to click a button and say, okay, if he's taking secret information and sending it out as unclassified, and then the system will be secure because the user is cleared and responsible. And then we built systems like that, and we discovered in the real world, or attempting to use them in the real world, that you had to click a pop-up that said, or is it okay to declassify this information about every 30 seconds? And so, that trains the user to click OK, which, you sort of see the same thing when Microsoft built,
user access, UAC, user authorization control into Vista. You know, why did we miss that? Well, you know, another story. But you know, those things happen. You know, the behavioral sciences ought to be able to tell you that they'd happen. Why didn't they? So the bottom line, more collaboration between the social and behavioral sciences and the computer scientists who are designing the systems. And some of the specific contributions, you know, understanding threats, understanding design, informing decision makers about risk. You know, I come back, you know, I talked a few minutes ago about OPM. You know, one of the things that I used to do in my job at Microsoft, if somebody couldn't meet a security development lifecycle role, then, you know, we had this formalized process where somebody who understood the security implications of that limitation talked to a manager from the organization that was building the product. You know, what could happen? You know, what do we mean? You know, let me explain this risk to you. And then jointly they'd make a decision. The manager shipping the product had the ultimate responsibility. Jointly make a decision, you know, do we ship or not? That worked okay. It's not necessarily a generalizable or scalable process. You know, how do you get to the point where people understand risk? I mean, I'm overemphasizing this. And I talked to the, you know, probably over what it's represented in the report, because I think that's super important. How do you get people to understand risk and accept it? Planning for resilience, translating problems, building cross-disciplinary teams to try to get security and the human and organizational aspects of security reflected. Super important. And again, just a list of topics. Organization theory, how you promulgate policy. International relations, we've talked a lot about norms of conduct. Internationally, how do you get another country to keep, how do you get another country to say, no, we won't do that? And then how do you get confidence that they'll actually do what they said? And how do you get to the point where you're right in having that confidence? And incentives. You know, as George said, you've got an asymmetric problem. The attackers have to defend everything all the time. The defenders only have to catch. Yeah. Boy, I didn't even pick that up on these slides. This is backwards. The defenders have to defend everything all the time, and the attackers only have to catch it. Have to get a single attack. Boy, I don't know where that language came from. That's just wrong. I'm sorry? Yeah. Maybe it is. The defender's got to catch everything. The attacker's got to find one mistake. Let's try that. And so risk analysis. I mean, how do you characterize? It's not like car insurance or fire insurance where you've got a lot of independent events that you can collect statistics on. How do you incentivize remediations? How do you incentivize information sharing? How do you incentivize knowledge generation? risk, and I've talked about that. And then engineering, operational, and life cycle considerations. We talked about how organizations have actually adopted or not adopted security practices in the real world. We talked about the software development practices, the secure development lifecycle sorts of things that I've been involved with and other organizations have adopted, and how they get integrated into organizations across the board. One of the things that we've talked about a lot, and I guess there's the first session after the break. There's a methodology called threat modeling that's used very widely in industry as a design analysis technique. Doesn't have anything to do with threats, but there are hundreds of thousands of COTS developers who use the methodology, and so how did we get that adoption, and how do we build on that rather than try to do something that doesn't work as well. Deployments, system administrators, vulnerability research. One of the interesting things that's come up in the last couple of years is this phenomenon called bug bounties. Organizations pay outsiders to report vulnerabilities in their products, and that's an interesting phenomenon. It's good in that it mobilizes the community to help make your software better. It's terrible if you say, well, I'm just going to ship anything, I'm going to pay a bug bounty, and I'm going to fix anything that anybody reports to me, because that's a very expensive way to get your security assurance done after the product is shipped. And I see, one of the major advocates of bug bounties is very mature about that latter point. You got to have it as a complement to a secure development process, not as an alternative. But a lot of people say, well, I'll pay a bug bounty and then my system will be secure. Not so much. How do you measure? What do you measure? How do you know? What results you're having? What effects you're having? Some research topics in this area: trusted subsystems, protection of cloud-based services is a big one. We have these enormous cloud systems, Amazon, AWS, Azure, Google, IBM, all operate these cloud-based services. Entities worldwide are relying on them a lot to store sensitive data. My impression is that the cloud providers do a very good job of offering a secured environment, probably a better job than the individual IT shops that they're supplanting. But if you put your data in the cloud, you also have to take your own measures to protect it, whether it's using a patched virtual machine or setting the protections right or not setting the accesses open the world. And so we see these reports of somebody put their data in the cloud, and then all this personal data was downloaded because it was on an unprotected virtual machine. Not so good. How do you get the right adoption? How do you get the right division of effort? Understanding assumptions about longevity. I talked about MRI machine running Windows XP. What should people be doing to transition to updated systems? What's actually happening? And then sustainment of foundational research. Only one slide here. The strategic plan refers to the National Plan for Cybersecurity Research, organization called SCORE. There are elements of that plan cited here, but we thought in general that the foundational research plans from the government were pretty healthy and pretty well founded. We thought that they were going in the right direction, and we didn't have a lot to say in terms of recommendations for changes there. And then finally, institutional changes. We talked about research practice and approach, and I want to try to be a little controversial, to sort of motivate some questions. I go to Black Hat, and there's some hacker who shows up from some either vulnerability research firm or it's an independent, or it's somebody who's too young to work yet, and he shows up and reports a new cool class of vulnerability in some product and gets a lot of kudos and maybe an offer of a consulting job. And then I go to Oakland, and there's some academic who shows up and reports a new cool class of vulnerability in some system, and maybe he or she gets promoted to associate professor. What's the difference? What are the standards that make academic research different from the stuff that you'd see at a HackerCon? Is there a difference? If there's not, is that okay? What are the publication cultures and incentives? We talked about the importance of honest-to-goodness research, having clear objectives, having clear understanding of the literature and art, having clear hypotheses, having clear results, and we think that that's sort of an important part of scholarship. I think it probably happens a lot. I'm not so much of an academic as some of the other folks on the committee were, but it was something that we called out, the importance of being relatively well structured and well disciplined in terms of the research that's done. And then, of course, continuing emphasis throughout the paper on interdisciplinary research, on integrating the social sciences and so on. And we thought it was important for institutions to demand that, to say, this is science, it ought to be formal, it ought to have a hypothesis, it ought to have conclusions, it ought to have a scientific methodology. Thought it was important to support joint projects across disciplines. We thought it was important to emphasize operational and life cycle perspectives. How would this get deployed? How would people actually take advantage of these results, as well as just putting things out? We thought it was important to integrate with business cases so that people would adopt. We thought that, as I said, we thought the federal programs in their breadth and depth seemed appropriate. Maybe a little more emphasis on diversity in approach and disciplines. and again, emphasize the connection to the social, behavioral, and decision sciences. We did look at the classified domain briefly, and the report of that is obviously classified. It's not a big document. I mean, I think you read the report that's on the web, you get the essence of what we said. So these are the conclusions. I think I've sort of belabored things in terms of big challenge, lot of need for discipline in the science and approaches, a lot of need for interdisciplinary approaches, a lot of need to work together, a lot of need to consider real-world applications as well as theory. I realize that I should have put the URL for the report on these slides. I didn't do that. I'll dig it up and get it to the conference organizers so that you can download it. I was talking with George this morning. There is a way to download the entire report as a PDF without having to pay the National Academy's money, and I'll write down those tricks so that you can get the report if you want to get a copy.
It's easily findable.
Yeah.